Okay, good afternoon, everyone. As I just mentioned, my name is Bonnie Lewis and I am based at the University of Glasgow. My presentation is on the effects of biogeochemical change on Arctic primary productivity. So this is one part of a much larger project called Carving Glaciers, which is focused on the determination of the advance and retreat of glaciers in southwest Greenland over the past 1,000 years. Half of the team, Douglas, Bryce and Denny, are looking at indicators of this advance and retreat in the terrestrial environment. And the rest of us, Kate, Nick and myself, are looking at these indicators in the marine environment. So just a quick background on the Greenland ice sheet. It contains the largest store of fresh water in the northern hemisphere. This is equivalent to over 7 metres in sea level rise if it were to completely melt. The Greenland coastal ecosystems are highly productive and support a number of economically important fisheries which generate a large portion of Greenland's national income. So climate change is expected to alter the marine biogeochemical environment in the Arctic over the next coming century, and this is expected to alter the marine productivity in the region. So the research is telling us the melt rates of the Greenland ice sheet are accelerating at the moment. This is due to the increase in CO2 in the atmosphere, which is warming the Arctic temperatures and has led to a decrease in sea ice and an increase in the glacial melt at unprecedented rates. So to give you an idea of the acceleration that's happening at the moment, the graph here on your left is showing accumulated melt area from 1978 to 2008. And in that 30 years, you can see this has increased from about 14 million to 30 million square kilometres. On the right-hand side, this is taken from a report in 2006. It is showing that the ice mass of the Greenland ice sheet has been decreasing at 269 gigatons a year over the past 14 years. So there's a lot of change occurring in the coastal areas of the Greenland ice sheet at the moment with these increased temperatures, the increased freshening and ocean acidification, and these are expected to alter the coastal productivity and ecosystems in this region. The problem at the moment is we have a very limited understanding of how these impacts are going to affect the productivity, and we have very limited historic data available on the Greenland ice sheet. So the satellite images we have showing the retreat only go back the past 40 years. We don't have any ecological monitoring systems that have taken data for the early 2000s. So the main question that we are trying to answer at the moment is how will biogeochemical change and Arctic freshening impact coastal primary productivity on the Greenland coast, and how sensitive is this productivity to these multiple stresses? So to answer this question, we've broken this down into 3 separate objectives. The first is to reconstruct the marine temperature, the second is to reconstruct the salinity, and thirdly, we're going to compare these biogeochemical changes with the major shifts in Arctic primary productivity. But in this talk, we're just going to focus on the first 2 objectives. So to achieve the first 2 objectives, we need to look at coralline algae. So coralline algae are a red calcifying algae. They're found worldwide from the poles to the tropics. They have 3 different life or growth forms: encrusting, branching, and the free-living rhodolith. They are long-lived. They've been reported to be living up to 1,200 years. They have a very slow growth rate, which is less than 1 millimetre a year in cold water. This growth rate doesn't change with age, and they precipitate a calcium carbonate skeleton made up of high magnesium calcite. Coralline algae also produce growth bands. So much like trees lay down regular rings in relation to environmental conditions such as increased rainfall or drought periods, coralline algae lay down regular growth bands in their calcium carbonate skeleton as a response to changes in environmental parameters such as light and temperature. You can see the banding here corresponds, well, the dark and light banding corresponds to these annual changes in light and temperature. So, for example, one of these dark bands here represents the winter, the next dark band is 1 year of annual growth. So within these annual bands is a record of the ambient seawater carbonate chemistry at the time of calcification, making them a very useful proxy for reconstructing paleo-environmental variables such as the sea surface temperature. The magnetite ratio is strongly correlated to sea surface temperatures. So if, for example, you wanted to know what the temperature was 20 years ago, you can count back 20 years in the sample from when it's finished or when it's collected. So up here is the present day, count back 20 years, you can get the magnetite ratio from inside that band, and this will give you the temperature for that year. More recently, the barium calcite ratio in the coralline skeleton has been used as an indicator for freshening or upwelling, and this increase, with an increase in barium corresponding to an increase of this fresh water. So this can give us an indication of the glacier melt rates as well. To reconstruct the marine temperature and salinity, coralline algal samples were collected by hand from various sites in southwest Greenland fjord. So the little pink rocks you can see down the bottom are the coralline algae. We had 4 sample sites. The KNS site over here is picking up the glacial signal from this tidewater glacier here. The Osman site is picking up the glacier signal from this land terminating glacier, and the marine site down the bottom was out of control. So to get the magnesium and barium calcite ratios from the coralline skeleton, the samples are run under laser ablation ICP mass spec, which is up there on the left-hand corner. This method can give you a continuous record of the selected elemental ratios, such as the mag calcite ratio, from the very top of the sample, which is the present day, back to the bottom of the sample, which goes back into the past. So we've just finished running this analysis on our samples from Greenland, and to give you an example of the data that's come out of this, I've taken out 3 40-year blocks of the mag calcite ratio, which you can see there. And you can see the long-term changing trends or cycles in the mag calcite ratio from approximately 100 years, 160 years ago down the back here to the present day on the left-hand side. So you can see that around 160 years ago we had an increase in temperature for about 20 years. Over here, this is decreased, for about 40 years. This is decreased briefly, it's increased again to a higher extent the next 40 years, and then it's decreased down to where it's currently sitting today. So we've added, we can also combine these marine temperatures with barium ratio to examine the drivers of changes in marine temperature over the decadal timescales. So we've added the freshening data onto here, which is the orange line down the bottom, and you can see the changes in marine temperature are mainly driven, well, you can see that the glacier melt rate here for the first 100 years hasn't really changed much, whereas the marine temperature has gone up and down. So this would indicate that perhaps this marine temperature has been driven by the air, not by the glacier melt rates. You get to the last 60 years of growth. So from here onwards, you can see the decline in the marine temperature matches an increase in the melting glacier. So this would indicate that the marine temperature has been driven by the melting of the glacier. So this is looking at the mag calcite ratio at decadal timescales. We can also zoom in a bit and look at these mag calcite ratios at an annual growth rate or an annual resolution. So here you can see it's 2 or 3 years taken from the very top, so the last 10 years of the sample growth. You can see an increase in marine temperature. Immediately after this, we've had an increase in the glacial melt, which has brought down the marine temperature. As soon as this glacial melt has dropped, the marine temperature has picked up again. So you can see at these annual time scales that the marine temperature has been driven by these glacial melt rates. So we can also check the periodicity of a scale of these mag calcite ratios by getting our data and overlaying it onto the actual sample to check that what we're seeing as annual growth or annual banding is matching the actual annual banding in the sample. So once we've got all these, once we've done the objectives 1 and 2, we can then reconstruct the marine temperature and salinity So we can then use our reconstructed marine temperature and salinity levels to the recorded coastal primary productivity rates. So over the last 10 years, our collaborators in Denmark and Greenland have been collecting biological temporal data such as the chlorophyll A. I've got species, phytoplankton, species composition, etc. from our study site. So we can examine how these biological variables have responded to the changes that we've recorded in the salinity and temperature over the last 10 years. And once we've done all that, we should hopefully have a better understanding of how the rate of biogeochemical change and freshening in southwest Greenland has changed over the last few years, or over the last 160 years, as well as the sensitivity of the Arctic coastal primary productivity and the rate at which that was responded to these changes in this salinity and temperature. So that's all I have at the moment. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Bonnie. Any questions from the floor?
Yes, can you just start from Sarah? Have you looked at the seasonal impact, like from winter to summer, how this chemical activity?
With the temperature or with the product? Yeah. Anyone zoom back up here? See one of those. Anyone? We'll pick one. Anyone? So this is the mean annual temperatures of both the winter and summer. Once we separate them out, we'll be able to see better the actual annual changes in winter and summer temperatures. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Because I thought maybe it's just the summer, you know.
This is the entire year for the past 160 years. So it's just an average at the moment. We've only just started getting into the analysis of this. So once we get into it further, we can separate the summer and temperature out and look at the changes over the annual timescales with that as well.
I have a question relevant given that what you've just said about just starting to analyse this, but given that you've got these records now over the last 10 years, can you make any predictions about how things have changed beyond that?
No, not really. So we've basically looked at one or two of the samples at the moment. The long term, like the decadal information, looks like the seawater has been driven by the air temperatures, so it's increasing, but then it's dropping down at the end again. The 10-year annual resolution is very variable, so you can't really make any long-term predictions from that. We need to look back at these long-term scales, and we haven't analysed them at the moment.
Any other questions? Okay, let's move on. Thank you, Bonnie.